Okay. Welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the San Rafael City Council for Monday, August 1st. I'll request
recording in progress.
Do I need to start over? Okay. Redo. Welcome everyone, a regular meeting of San Rafael City Council for Monday, August 1st. I'll request the city clerk to call the roll.
All right. Councilmember Bushy? Present. Councilmember Hill?
Present.
Vice Mayor Kurtz?
Present.
Councilmember Yeden-Skladi is absent. Mayor Kate?
Present. There are 4 of us. So welcome everyone. We're glad that you're here, either in person or Zooming in virtually. We are in a new hybrid format. And as always, we start every meeting with thanking the staff for what they do every day, both on the streets and behind the scenes to make our city run so beautifully. Thank you. Summer in San Rafael. Yes, we're in summer, even though it rained today. I know all of us are celebrating that, but it means there are lots of events going on and opportunities to get out there. So if you don't already, please subscribe to the city manager's newsletter called The Snapshot, because then you will know what is going on and you will be totally engaged and informed as to what is happening in the city. One event that is occurring is tomorrow night, National Night Out. It's a crime prevention event as our community comes together and they form neighborhood block parties. Neighborhoods have self-selected and signed up to participate. They get to know each other and they have an opportunity to meet their fire and police department professionals. Council members will be there. I will be there. And so we look forward to seeing all of you. It's a night that we send as a community a powerful message about neighborhood unity, crime prevention awareness, safety, and police community partnerships. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I have to say, hopefully it won't rain. As much as we want the rain, hopefully it won't rain. Before we get to the agenda, I would like to include a land acknowledgement. Present-day San Rafael is located in the traditional lands of the coastal Miwok people, and we recognize this history as well as those who still reside here. With that, I will turn to the city clerk, who will share how people can participate virtually.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. The meeting tonight is being recorded and streamed live to YouTube, and anyone who is unable to make it to the council chambers can still provide public comment by telephone by calling 669-900-9128 and use the meeting ID 817-3692-0337 or comment and watch directly through Zoom using the link on the agenda. If you're commenting over the telephone, please press *9 when Mayor Kate opens the public comment period. Once you've heard a notification that the host is inviting you to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself. If commenting through Zoom, you can use the raised hand button to let people know that you would like to speak and wait until you've been unmuted. If you experience any technical difficulties, please email city.clerk@cityofsanrafael.org. For those of you who are attending in person and wish to provide public comment, you can approach the podium once Mayor Kate opens the public comment period. Displayed on the podium and the projector is a 2-minute timer to help you stay within the 2-minute time frame. For public comments not related to this evening's agenda, you can fill out a public comment card, which are found in the lobby table or right here, and then submit them to me. You're invited, though not required, to introduce yourself and say what part of San Rafael you reside in, or if you're from outside of San Rafael. We are offering closed captioning for this evening's meeting on Zoom. You can select the live transcript button on Zoom to enable this feature. Thank you.
Thank you. So open time for public expression. Are there any comments from the public on topics not on tonight's agenda? First, I'll look in the chambers. If so, come on down. Not seeing anyone jumping up at the moment. I'll turn to the city clerk. Anyone virtually?
I do see a couple of hands raised. We're ready.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members, and thank you, the staff, for this opportunity. My name is Duria Sayed, and I'm an outreach analyst in the Community Relations and Outreach branch of the Department of Insurance. It's a wildfire season, so I want to touch bases on Safer from Wildfire program. Safer from Wildfires is an interagency partnership between Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara and the Emergency Response and Readiness Agencies and Governor Gavin Newsom's administration. Its purpose is to protect lives, homes, and businesses by reducing wildfire risk. The Commissioner is using every tool available to improve insurance for our communities. We have CAL FIRE, Cal OES, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and the additional public utilities and commission that we have partnered with. It's a ground-up approach for wildfire resilience. It has 3 layers. We call it SFW 1, 2, 3 plan. Number 1, protect the structures, such as making sure your roof and vents are up to code. Number 2, the immediate surrounding is brushed too close to your home, and are there flammable items. And number 3, the community. Involve your entire community to prevent wildfires. And so basically, I just wanted to come and remind you that Department of Insurance is here. We are here to help you with any of your insurance needs. Our website is insurance.ca.gov, or call us on our hotline at 800-927-4357. We have a dedicated staff of experts that will walk you through your problems, and we can answer your specific question. And if they don't pick up, our callback rate is under 2 minutes. So thank you so much. We also have another program that we want to bring it to the council sometimes. It's our California low-cost auto insurance program. It's a state-sponsored program with liability insurance that supported by the Department of Insurance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. You may not know this from Mayor Collins' comments, but the governor of California just declared a state of emergency regarding monkeypox. And it's some interesting timing with National Night Out, where you're going to have a lot of law enforcement interacting with the public. I was present by coincidence at the time the new sheriff was being sworn in at Civic Center. And police departments from all over the county, and in fact, even from Sonoma, had come for the swearing in. And I went masked into the room just to get, a quick videotape of it. And I was absolutely shocked by how in this very tightly packed room, almost no one was wearing a mask. There were a small number of masked people who were near the door. So tomorrow, when you have National Night Out, I hope that you will be observing some, CDC guidelines and just basic common sense in the middle of 2 outbreaks. One, the BA.5 variant, and the next one, which is monkeypox, in which apparently law enforcement across the county does not really think too much of. Then also, apparently a large number of people in your, quote, SSA internment camp were very ill in mid-July. One went missing. I finally was able to locate him after calling multiple hospitals. He would likely not be in hospital were it not for the totally unsanitary conditions in that camp. Even young people in that camp have reported developing cellulitis as a result of the lack of running water in that camp. And there has been no health inspection by either the county or the state. I have CPRA.
Oh, hi there. I just would like to enter in the record. We're appreciative of what you're doing, and monkeypox does not involve, spread does not involve wearing a mask. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
I see no further hands or no other hands raised. So I'll give everyone a couple seconds.
Okay, let us finish virtual and then we'll open it back up.
I see no other virtual public comment.
Okay, yep, so come on down. I'm sorry, whatever you feel comfortable with.
My name is Al, I live in Universal Park. Or code enforcement to take the actions they need to take to ensure the security of the individuals that live within San Rafael.
Thank you. And if you could give your contact information to the Assistant City Manager, and then she'll follow up with you. Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the chambers like to address the council? Anything not on the agenda? Okay, not see anything. I will close the public comment and bring it to the City Manager for the Assistant City Manager for her report this evening. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Christina Lilovich, Assistant City Manager, sitting in for City Manager Schutz, who's on a well-deserved vacation. So I'm happy to be here tonight. Just a couple of announcements. As a reminder, there is no regular City Council meeting on August 15th. So the next regular City Council meeting will be on Tuesday, September 6th, given that Monday is Labor Day. There's also a special City Council meeting on Monday, August 8th, whereby applicants for the Planning Commission, Park and Rec Commission, and the new Public Art Review Board will be interviewed by the City Council, which starts at 5 o'clock. And then just a quick COVID update, because we haven't given you one recently. We all know that the risks of COVID during gatherings are high, but there's some really interesting statistics and some new information coming out of Dr. Willis's office. And the Marin County Public Health Department suggests that even a small gathering of like 10 people indoors unmasked creates a 40% likelihood that at least one person will get COVID at that event. And then that percentage rises to 98% for gatherings of 100 people or more. So we are all learning to live with this and learning, we all know to mask and test and isolate, but it's just an important reminder, particularly as folks are gathering, be outside whenever possible and definitely mask when indoors in a close environment. There are currently 494 active cases in Marin County, so we continue to be in that high threshold. And just a reminder that children 6 months and older are now eligible for vaccination. So for more information about that, you can talk to your pediatrician and visit vaccinateall58.com. That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to my colleagues for council member reports. Vice Mayor.
Just want to provide a quick update on the Homeless Policy Steering Committee. We had a funding round for different agencies and went through a great interview process of those and have made a recommendation to provide additional funding for Center for Domestic Peace and for Homeward Bound, both for additional housing. So it's really focused around the housing. That was it.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
So as we're in summer, none of the subcommittees actually met in the last 2 weeks. So I have actually nothing to report related to my subcommittee assignments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, there is that. Dr. Bushy.
And as we are in summer, I can report that I've been on vacation, but I'm back and very excited to dive back in.
Thank you. I'll just quickly report out. I'm your representative on TAM, the Transportation Authority of Marin. And at our meeting this past week, the committee approved the canal-based transportation plan, which is fantastic. It was a very much a deep dive into the canal neighborhood and what can be done there to enhance transit, everything from lighting to just straight up transit options. So that's a great milestone that we'll continue to use to inform both the decisions we make here as well as our CIP, which is our capital improvement project. So much thanks to TAM for overseeing funding and sourcing that document. We also had received an update on state bills, the different ones that are working its way through the legislature. I don't have any that are specific right now to San Rafael to share. And then this morning, Marin Transit, we met. Right now, we're at the end of our free rides for students and youths. This was a program offered through summer of 2022. It goes for through mid-August, 2 more weeks. It's been very well received, and we'll have data on how successful it was after the program completes. In addition, Marin Transit has started a hashtag Transit to Parks. That's the name of the campaign, hashtag Transit to Parks. And there's a dedicated website really helping people figure out how can they get to our local parks using transit. And it's very easy to navigate that website. And hopefully we'll get more people out for the rest of the summer. And then finally, always ending on a nice positive note, Marin Transit right now is at 81% of their pre-COVID ridership. And when you look at transit agencies across the Bay Area, it is the highest in all of, I think it was the North Bay. I'm trying to think how far down south it went. But in terms of the Bay Area, the highest in terms of already regaining back to where we were pre-COVID. So hats off to the Marin Transit staff and for providing a service that's really needed here in San Rafael. So, and I attended SMART as well. And for that one, the highlight that I want to share is SMART is providing a ferry, or SMART, to meet the ferry for the Giants games. So we can get people to take transit all the way there. Go Giants. Okay. With that, I will accept any public comment on either the city manager or city council member reports. I'll look around the chambers. Don't see anyone who wants to comment. And is there anyone virtually?
I do see a couple of hands raised, but first, if you're calling in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature.
Thanks. I wanted to respond to Kurtz's comment, but first I wanted to address the comments that followed mine in the first section of public comment. An unidentified man said that there was no respiratory spread from monkeypox. I'm not sure what his exact statement was, but it needs to be corrected. I would advise everyone to look at the CDC website, and respiratory secretions are a method of transmission. And the city has a responsibility, because it's doing an event tomorrow, to at least try to do some mitigation. People should be advised, probably shaking hands with police officers, other public safety officers, or anyone else in the community is not the smartest thing to be doing when hospitals are already taxed with COVID patients and the BA.5 variant is really spreading, as I think your city manager's comments responsibly made clear. I did want to point out, since Ms. Kurtz brought up Homeward Bound of Marin, that Homeward Bound of Marin, while it gets a lot of praise from the county and from the city of San Rafael, unjustifiably, in my view, it is being sued at present, and the complaints are extraordinary. Homeward Bound has been charging unhoused individuals close to $300 a month for congregate shelter. It doesn't charge every unhoused individual that amount, but it has been charging a large number of unhoused individuals for congregate shelter, which is completely unreasonable given the amount of money that they're getting from the county, the state, and sometimes cities, coerced or compelled labor. This is not a good organization. I'm sorry that you're working with them, but you should also be honest about what they are doing. Thank you.
We're ready for you.
Oh, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Damien here. Mayor, Kate, my comments are in response to your comment regarding the dollars from TAM
can you hear
to
me,
the
Damien?
canal area allocated for in detail. Yeah, can you hear me?
You're cutting out just a bit.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Tell me if I come in, if you can't hear me, let me know again. I'll just try another time. Mary Kate, my comments are for you regarding the TAM dollars. Are these dollars or any relation to the canal area being a opportunity zone? Will you please briefly comment back when the public comment is over regarding these TAM dollars? Are they in relation to the canal area being an opportunity zone? Thank you.
I see no other hands raised, and I'll give everyone a couple of seconds. I see no further public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment, but will respond. We in terms of TAM, and you can always go to the website and read the staff report and all the information, but it doesn't have anything to do with the opportunity zone. So happy to follow up with you further. Feel free to contact me. Okay. With that, we will go to the consent calendar. I know that Councilmember Hill had a comment on one of the items before I open it up for public comment.
Yes, and this actually just came in. I consulted with the city attorney and I need to disqualify myself from item 4K. The reason being that I have disqualified myself from it before, even though the project in question, or this item in question, is not within my buffer zone. I was advised that since I disqualified myself before, I need to remain consistent with that disqualification on this one as well.
Okay.
So I will need to step away for that item.
Okay, so we will pull item 4K and we will handle that one separately. Okay, any other items to be held? Not seen any. I will open up public comment though for all items from 4A through 4K. So public comment. Anyone in the room like to address the council on the consent calendar? Not seen anyone in the chambers. Is there anyone virtually who'd like to comment on the consent agenda?
Calling in, you can press *9, and if using Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. I do see 2 hands raised.
Good evening. This is Matthew Hartzell, Director of Planning and Research at WTB TAM based in Mill Valley. I am speaking about consent calendar item 4J, the Manuel T. Freitas 101 North Ramps Roundabout project. I want to express on behalf of our organization strong support for the current design that the city, the Department of Public Works, and the consultants that the city has retained have put together for this project. It's an excellent project. Roundabouts provide significant safety improvements versus traditional intersections. And this intersection is one of the most notoriously difficult in all of Marin County. So this will be a welcome improvement. And we want to thank the Department of Public Works staff for engaging the public and welcoming public participation throughout the planning and design process. The original design from several months ago did not provide much accommodation for multimodal users, but Public Works staff listened to the feedback of transportation advocates such as ourselves, and they revisited the design and came back with a vastly superior version that includes a spacious facility for bicycles and pedestrians around the eastern side of the roundabout, as well as a two-way protected bicycle facility from Freitas Parkway south to the Smart Civic Center station. This will make the Civic Center station more accessible, hopefully increasing ridership on Smart. And it will be a welcome addition to Terra Linda's multimodal network, increasing safe multimodal access between the different businesses, neighborhoods, and civic facilities along the eastern side of 101 in northern San Rafael. So thank you. That's all.
Hello, my name is Gregory Andrew. And as my letter to the City Council and the clerk said on July 29th, I respectfully request that item 4C, the SB9 housing ordinance, be pulled from the consent calendar and openly discussed as a regular item at this meeting tonight. I hope that I don't need to say any more on that and that you will pull it. I just heard that you are pulling a consent calendar and handling that separately. So I hope that you will pull item 4C and discuss it separately. Thank you.
Hello, Mayor Kate and council members. This is David Smith. I live in Terra Linda and have done so for, 24, 25 years. As a Brit, I heartily approve of roundabouts, and this is in regard to 4J, the roundabout at the Freitas off-ramp. But my concern is that I see a lot of American drivers, especially more elderly ones, who don't know how to use roundabouts and don't know how to navigate them. And I'm hoping there is going to be enough signage and forewarning of this change, because even at the Civic Center and Veterans Boulevard roundabout, I've seen more than one driver basically drive over the roundabout, obviously avoiding the landscape in the middle, but driving over the concrete protection part for that landscaping. And so I worry that with freeway off-ramp speeds, I think we can expect some accidents at the new roundabout if there's not sufficient signage and warning signs for drivers to slow down, and hopefully some public education as to how to navigate roundabouts. That's my comments. Thanks very much.
Thanks. I'm calling with regard to 4E, the legal services contract. This is Ava Crisanti, and I just want to let you know. I also wanted to let, well, I'm sure you should know, but public should know too, how difficult it is just to get basic answers from the San Rafael City Attorney's Office. I was forced to submit multiple CPRAs just trying to get an understanding of who had jurisdiction on the site where you've placed the SSA/internment camp for a majority Black and Latino unhoused population. It's an elderly population with significant medical vulnerabilities, and they've been stuck under a polluting freeway overpass for the past year. My efforts to figure out who had jurisdiction of that site were stymied by your new assistant city attorney, Genevieve Coyle, who simply sent me an old letter from the office saying that they don't respond to, quote, ad hoc questions. But my question wasn't ad hoc. It was after many times of trying to even obtain a lease that you apparently have or don't have with Caltrans for that site. So that's, you know, with all the money that you're spending, it would really help if your new attorney, whoever you're hiring on contract, had an understanding of why transparency matters. And I do want to point out that the reason I knew to ask for this is because an earlier CPRA turned up an email from Evan Barbier, the head of Barbier Security, from November 10th, 2021, indicating that San Rafael Police themselves had said that they don't have jurisdiction on that site. So we need answers on that. Thank you.
I see no other hands raised, so I'll give everyone a couple of seconds. I see no public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment. I did want to respond to Mr. Andrews' request on item 4C. That was talked about as an agenda item at our previous meeting, SB 9, for quite a long time. He did have a follow-up letter where he expressed concern that our ordinance didn't include something that he saw at the state level, and our staff did respond to Mr. Andrews that what he was concerned about is included in our ordinance, even though it wasn't spelled out. So I am not going to pull 4C for that reason. My colleagues are welcome to if they would like to, but not seeing that, I will request a motion on items 4A through 4J, not K, because Councilmember Hill will actually, I think, need to leave the chambers. So he'll sprint out and come back at that moment, but is there a motion on 4A through 4J?
I'll make a motion.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye. That motion carries 4-0. Councilmember Hill, in accordance with the city attorney, will leave the chamber before we.
Hang on one second. Mayor Kate, actually, this is a consent agenda item. Councilmember Hill is not required to leave the dais, so you can save a little bit of time.
Okay.
Regular item he would, but it's one of the funny aspects of the Political Reform Act, so he can remain on the dais and not participate in the vote due to his conflict on the basis of proximity.
Thank you for that clarification. So is there a motion on item 4J?
So moved.
Second? Okay. Oh, 4K. Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye. That motion carries 3-0. Thank you. We are going to our first item of the public hearing, amendment to zoning ordinance to allow animal care facilities as a conditionally permitted use in office zoning district. And I see someone joining us at the dais or at the next to the assistant city manager. Hi, Director Judici. Do you want to introduce us?
I'd like to go ahead and introduce Janie Alsop. She is one of our consultants and has been working for us for about 3 or 4 years doing different projects. So she will be presenting this, and giving the recommendation.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Kate and members of the City Council. Before you this evening is a draft ordinance. Let's see, do I have the PowerPoint queued up
Yeah,
here?
so if you have a PowerPoint, I'll let you know when we can see it. Sometimes
There we go.
it takes a moment.
Squeeze right on in there.
Okay. There we go.
Great, thank you.
Again, good evening. The item before you this evening is a draft ordinance for a text amendment to the San Rafael Municipal Code to allow animal care facilities as a conditionally permitted use in the office zoning district, subject to performance standards. There are two parts to this proposed ordinance change. They're both text amendments. The first part would be an amendment to Chapter 14.05, which are the land use tables contained in the zoning ordinance. And this first part was initiated by an applicant in order to allow animal care facilities in the office district. It's noted that the animal care facilities are currently allowed in other commercial districts in the city of San Rafael, including neighborhood commercial, general commercial, commercial residential. So this part of the amendment would bring the office district in line with the other commercial districts. The conditional use permit that would be required would be by the zoning administrator, as it is with the other districts currently in the zoning ordinance. The second part of the ordinance amendment actually came about as part of the Planning Commission recommendation. The Planning Commission reviewed this project, the proposed amendment, on June 28th, and unanimously recommended that the City Council adopt the ordinance with an additional recommendation that performance standards or best practices for animal care facilities, similar to those that are already codified in the city's municipal code, be also adopted for animal care facilities. And this, the reason behind this was that it would help minimize potential nuisance factors on adjacent uses or adjacent districts. It's important to note that there is a difference between some of the terms that we're using in this context, and we don't use them every day. So I just have a slide here explaining that an animal care facility, basically it's a commercial use. It's a use that involves providing grooming, housing, medical care, or other services to animals, including veterinary care. Animal keeping, on the other hand, is the term that we use in our ordinance to describe the keeping of animals by private individuals on private property. So the proposed performance standards that are part of the amendment this evening would apply to the animal care facilities, similar to the way that we already have performance standards for animal keeping. And so animal keeping is private, animal care facilities would be a commercial type use, just an important distinction. So the text amendment, again, would allow the animal care facilities in the office district. I believe I've gone over this, indicating that they're already conditionally permitted, and the Planning Commission's recommendation is reflected in Attachment 1. It's very similar to what you see in the animal care or animal keeping section of the ordinance. And we feel that with these additional performance standards, we've struck the right balance between providing an additional layer of making sure that potential nuisance issues do not arise while not making it too onerous for any applicants. Because one of the other purposes of this is to broaden the uses that are allowed in the office district so that they provide convenient and access for residents and workers in the community. The performance standards, I'll just list them briefly here. It's very similar to what you will see in any type of use permit findings: compliance with applicable laws, making sure that there are no violations of the code, and item 1 actually includes a requirement that the facility maintain an employee handbook outlining best management practices in order to achieve these performance standards. Sound attenuation in the event that that is needed. There would be provision for requiring noise attenuation studies if deemed appropriate to ensure that the noise levels in Chapter 813, which is our noise ordinance, do not get exceeded. And also to make sure that there is adequate waste facilities and hazardous waste facilities maintained at all time. And then overall, that the animal care facility will not result in other public or private nuisances. That is the conclusion of my staff report. I promised I would keep it very brief. Just a couple of other comments, and that is we did check in with both the county because the city, as do other communities in Marin County, we have a joint powers agreement with the Marin County Humane Society, acting as the animal control officers. Also checked with the San Rafael Police Department to make sure that we did not have any long history of complaints or issues. Interestingly, I learned from the police department that there are dog barking concerns and complaints that come through, but they are almost 100% from private animal keeping type uses, not animal care facilities. And there was no record either with the county or with the city of any complaints on animal care facilities that are currently operating in the city. So that is good news. The recommendation, as indicated in the staff report, is introduction of an ordinance and waiving further reading of the ordinance, amending Title 14 to allow animal care facilities, excluding exterior kennels, pens, or runs, as a conditionally permitted use in the office district, and to establish the performance standards for these animal care facilities. I'm happy to answer any questions. And also Riley Hurd is here present representing the applicant.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Any questions? Okay. I don't see any questions, so I will open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public, yes, that would like to address us on this issue? It's
right here.
There you go.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Riley Hurd. I am a longtime San Rafael resident and also one of the applicants. And I just wanted to talk to you about the need for this ordinance. During the pandemic, the percentage of households with pets went from 45 to 72%. In January, there was an article in the IJ called "Why Vet Care Can Be Hard to Find." In July, the Chronicle wrote an article called "Veterinarians in Such Short Supply They Aero Commute In." So there's a huge demand for this, and it's coupled with a pretty marked lack of demand for traditional office space. So I kind of consider this as a fix to the zoning table. For some reason, it's allowed in all the other office, commercial, neighborhood commercial, but not this one. Admittedly, it's not right for every spot. That's why a CUP is necessary, and it's not just a P. They're a filter. They can ensure it's a good fit. You heard about the performance standards. And that came from the Planning Commission. They gave a unanimous recommendation. They said, hey, explore some standards. And the staff was so efficient that they already did that and brought you those tonight. So noise, waste, legal compliance, it's all covered. We have a number of clients that are ready to bring state-of-the-art animal facilities to San Rafael. And I think it's going to be a really good fit. And it will be controlled through the CUP process. So we'd ask that you adopt this ordinance, and I'm also available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Anyone else in the chambers? Yeah, come on down.
I'm not understanding. It sounds like doggy daycare or some veterinarian services, which sounds like a good idea, but I wonder if there's a limit to how many animals could be housed in a particular facility, or if there's an upper limit, because I understand that business is business and people would like to make good on their investment, and sometimes they they go overboard, and now I have 1,000 dogs in a small space and the animals are suffering and people are, anyway, it gets out of hand. I didn't see anything in the ordinance other than leveraging an existing municipal regulation to suggest that there might be some controls over how this was implemented in N1 and 2. I don't know what zone 0 is. So is that downtown San Rafael, or?
What we'll do is we'll collect all the questions and then we'll have staff answer them. Okay. So yeah.
So that's
okay. A few questions. Great. Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers? Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone virtually who would like to comment on this item?
If calling in, you can press *9. And if on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. I do see a hand.
Hello, my name is Gregory Andrew, and I live in San Rafael Meadows. And frankly, I am shocked and appalled that you refused to pull item 4C from the consent calendar. My letter of July 29th requested you pull the item, and I pointed out a valid reason why this item needed to be discussed as an open item. The email I received from the Community Development Director did not satisfy the concern I raised. Mayor Collin, you just stated in response to my request to pull the item that the SB9 requirement is included in the ordinance. That was a false statement. The requirement is not in the ordinance. Thank you.
We're accepting public comment right now on the animal control zoning issue. Any other public comment on this item?
I see no hands raised. I'll give everyone a moment. I see no further public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment. And there were two questions. One is regarding just general business operations and how we ensure by adding this, the office zoning in addition to the others, how we can ensure that business operations are appropriate. You don't have to get into the number of animals and everything else, but I think it's a more general concern about that. And then the second was about zone 0, which I think is office, but why don't we just have you clarify?
Yes, to refer to the O district, it stands for office, and office districts are located throughout the city of San Rafael. They're predominantly in the northern part of the city and along the Highway 101 corridor. And then to answer the other question, the ordinance revisions do not specify the number of animals or the type of animals. Because there are a number of different types of uses that fall under the umbrella of animal care facilities, most of which are licensed in some way by the state. Veterinary facilities, for sure, are licensed by the state, and kennels and other types of facilities that care for animals are licensed by the state. So we would follow whatever state standards are in place for the amount of space per animal and those types of requirements. The conditional use permit that would be required in all cases where animal care facilities are allowed in the city would provide that extra local layer of control. If it was determined that any type of control of the number of animals would be appropriate, we could impose that as a condition of the approval. But it's not likely that would be needed just because of the way these types of uses are typically regulated by the state.
Thank you for that answer. I'll turn to my colleagues for additional comments and then a motion. Vice Mayor, any comments on this item?
No, I just think it's great that the ordinance is coming forward, that it does provide additional opportunities for expanded business uses, and we need to keep updating our ordinances to fit the needs of the business community as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill, any comments?
I concur with the Vice Mayor's comments. I'm glad we're moving forward with meeting the need of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bushy.
I concur with my colleagues' comments.
Thank you. I as well. Thank you for bringing this forward, and I look forward, Mr. Hurd, to the business as well as workers being able to bring their pets, I think, to work. I don't. We'll see what that looks like. So thank you. With that, we're doing this a little bit differently. So I'll request a motion in a second, and then the city clerk will read. All you have to do is I just need a motion and then a second on this item.
I move that we introduce the ordinance by title only and waive for the reading of the ordinance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So now I ask the city clerk to read the title.
We have the first one and then we have this one.
No,
right?
So I turn it to the city clerk and she will read.
Yes, an ordinance of the City of Santa Fe amending the text of the Santa Fe Municipal Code, Table 14.05.020 under Section 14.05.020, Land Use Regulations, GCNCO C/O R/O FBWC, close paren, to allow animal care facilities as a conditionally permitted use in the Office O district subject to performance standards, amending the text of Table 14.06.020 under Section 14.06.020, Land Use Regulations, paren I, LI/O, CCI/O, LMU, close paren, to subject animal care facilities to performance standards, and amending text of Chapter 14.17 to establish performance standards for animal care facilities.
Thank you. And now we know why we had you read that instead of one of us. Could you call the roll, please?
Yes. Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 4-0. Thank you so much. Thank you, Janie. Our next agenda item is the San Rafael 2023-2031 housing element. And I see Director Judici and Barry Miller and Leslie Mendez all coming down.
Good evening, Mayor Kate and council members. Tonight's presentation will be delivered by Barry Miller, our consultant. The focus of tonight's presentation is on the housing sites. And what I wanted to say about that is that we, as you know, have been assigned a regional housing needs allocation of 3,220 units. Our obligation is to demonstrate through the housing element update that we have enough sites within the city that are zoned or classified for residential development. Luckily, within our city, we have a great majority of our sites already are zoned for residential development. So for us, it's an exercise of just pointing to sites and demonstrating to the Housing and Community Development Department at the state level that we are prepared to accommodate development. We're not developers. We're not going to know where development will actually occur, but we have identified enough sites that demonstrate our ability to accommodate these sites or these residential units in a way that will not contribute to continued segregation, patterns of segregation as has been in the past. So with that, I'll go ahead and slowly allow Barry Miller to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Director. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you. It's great to be back in the council chambers after 2.5 years of Zoom. I understand that the city clerk is going to be operating the slides on the PowerPoint, and I'll begin. Okay, great. So we're here this evening. Move on to the next slide, actually. Great. One more.
Yep.
Here we go. We're here this evening to talk to you about the sites inventory in the housing element. This is a specific task within our housing element update. We thought we would provide some context for what we're doing before we got into the sites inventory specifically. So the housing element is a required part of the San Rafael General Plan. It sounds maybe like we've been talking about it a lot lately, but it's not a new requirement. This is something we've been required to do for over 50 years. We're actually in the 6th cycle of our housing elements now. We've been doing this for a while. It's the only part of the general plan that's subject to certification by a state agency. In this case, it's the State Department of Housing and Community Development. We're required to do this roughly every 8 years, and all cities and counties in the Bay Area are on the same schedule, and we're all working to get this completed by January 2023. So this is also the only part of the general plan that's subject to extremely prescriptive requirements by the state of California. And those requirements have become a lot more prescriptive. There are a lot more teeth in this element than there used to be. One of the objectives of this process is that we demonstrate to the state that we are accommodating our fair share of the region's housing needs. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a future slide. Next slide, please. So one of the things that makes this housing element different from those that preceded it is that there is an overarching focus on what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a state law that was passed in 2017, AB 686, and it's essentially our guiding light through this process, which is that we intentionally work to end discrimination and segregation through this process, and that we work to create a more inclusive community. And that has a number of implications for how we approach this project. It affects our outreach. It affects the analysis that we do in this process. It reflects our policies with a greater emphasis on fair housing. And it also affects our site selection. So we actually need to be quite intentional about how we assign sites within the community to make sure that we're working to achieve the goal that you see on the slide here. Next slide, please. So the driving force behind this is what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA. That's the acronym that you've heard a lot about lately. So the RHNA is a number that is assigned by the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, to each city and county in the region. This is kind of a top-down process where the state of California determines how many housing units each region of the state needs to plan for the next 8 years. And then ABAG assigns those units to the individual cities and counties using a formula that takes into consideration things like the population of the city, the number of jobs, the access to transit, and social equity factors. So you can see the kind of telescoping down from the countywide number to Marin County's share of 13,572 units. 3,220 of those are ours, which means we need to demonstrate that we're able to accommodate that number of housing units in the community. Just as a benchmark, that's about 3 times, it's a little more than 3 times what the number was last time. Next slide, please. So the state has developed a number of guidelines, in some cases requirements, for how we identify our sites and how we present this information. First of all, we need to identify the income groups that each of our housing sites will serve. In other words, whether a particular site is available for lower income housing or above moderate income housing. These terms are all defined, and I can refer everyone to sanrafaelhousing.org for more information on some of these terms. But essentially, if we are designating a site for lower income housing under state rules, it has to accommodate at least 30 units per acre, which is effectively multifamily housing. And the sites need to be at least half an acre and accommodate at least 16 units each. So we have special rules for housing sites that we counted previously. I mentioned this is the 6th time we've done this in the last 50 years. And if we keep counting the same site over and over again, the state wants to know, why isn't that site getting developed? And they're actually asking us to streamline the approval of projects on sites that were developed previously. We can also count accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, but we need to be realistic in how we count them. So we look at trends over the last 3 or 4 years and we project that out. We can't just say, well, the rules are easier now, we can just do 100 every year. It doesn't work that way, at least in terms of the state. We can count projects that we call our development pipeline. These are things that we've approved, but they're not built yet. We're assuming that those projects will come online and be built in the next 8 years. We can count non-vacant sites, which is really critical because in San Rafael, most of our housing opportunities are on sites that are already developed with something else. So we're talking about parking lots or sites that have empty buildings or sites that have very low improvement values relative to the value of the land and so forth. But if we count those sites, we need to be prepared to demonstrate that they're realistic. And the state is looking through a very fine lens at what cities are saying is a realistic site these days. Speaking of realistic, we have to estimate the realistic capacity of each site. So just because a site is zoned at a certain density doesn't mean it's going to develop to the maximum number of units. We need to look at recent projects and see what kinds of densities we've been seeing. We also need to provide a buffer of additional sites in case any of our sites become unavailable during the planning period. And that buffer is typically between 15 and 30%. Next slide, please. So in addition to all of the state guidelines and rules, we have our own kind of constitution for development, and that's our general plan, which you all know was adopted last year. The general plan has its own set of guiding principles, and so our challenge is to identify sites that are both consistent with the state requirements and also consistent with our own guiding principles. So we're looking at preserving our open spaces and preventing exposure to sea level rise and wildfire and all of the other items you see highlighted on the slide. These are also guiding principles that help shape where we're looking at housing opportunities. Next slide, please. So here's the good news, which is that we do have capacity to meet our regional housing needs allocation without amending the land use map of our general plan and without major zoning changes. We have identified the need for minor tweaks to some of the existing zoning districts, but not to the map. And that's really, I think, an important factor and something that distinguishes San Rafael from many of the other cities in the county right now that have also been given very large assignments, but don't have the adequate land supply to meet their needs. So when we did the general plan update, it was with an eye toward accommodating this very large number that we knew was coming our way. And this is the good news. Now, the less good news is on the next slide, which is that we still have challenges. Many of our sites are non-vacant. They have active uses on them, saying they will be available for development in the next 8 years. Requires a little bit of a leap of faith in some cases. So we do need to plan for that buffer because we know not every single one of these sites is going to realistically be developed in the next 8 years. Some of the sites we've identified are less than that half-acre threshold, especially downtown. Some of them have multiple owners, and aggregation of lots into developable parcels is not as easy as it used to be without a redevelopment agency. Land and construction costs are very high. They've increased about 40 to 45% since the start of the pandemic. And you see that in the cost of housing as well. We also have tax credit rules that make it more difficult to build affordable housing in some areas, particularly some of the areas where we know that affordable housing is needed and desired by folks who live there. Our distribution of lower income sites is still a little bit uneven, meaning there are parts of the city where there's very little land that's zoned for multifamily housing, in some cases because of access or utilities or hazards, but that is a reality in San Rafael. We also know we have infrastructure constraints, including water and road capacity, and that there are challenges in accommodating this volume of housing in such a short period of time. Also, a lot of our capacity is associated with projects that are already either approved or they're pending. And most of those projects are market rate, not affordable, although there are some affordable. Next slide, please. So we're going to walk you now through 6 categories of sites and beginning with the approved projects. And if you can visualize with each one of these categories, we're moving the needle closer to that 3,220 number, sort of like a fundraising thermometer with each one of these. So this is the first tier, and these are our approved projects. We have about 800 units that are in the development pipeline, which we're assuming will be completed by 2031. With all of these projects complete, we will have met 15% of our lower income RHNA assignment and 31% of our moderate and above moderate RHNA income assignment. And you can see an example of one of those lower income projects is the Vivillon Senior Housing, which just had its groundbreaking and is now under construction in downtown San Rafael. Next slide. So the next tier are our proposed projects, and there are 1,300 units in the pipeline. We'll say a majority of that capacity is associated with the Northgate Mall redevelopment project. The first phase of that is presumed to come online during the timeframe of this housing element. That's 907 units with 96 affordable. So when you add the proposed projects to the approved projects, we stand at 24% of our lower income need and 94% of the moderate and above. So just with what's approved and in the pipeline brings us to almost the entire moderate and above moderate income need, but only a quarter of the way to the lower income need. So we can kind of see the story emerging here of where we need to focus in our housing element. Next slide, please. So then we move into our low and medium density housing sites. There are a lot of small individual vacant lots that we've identified, but most of those are really only capable of accommodating one house. And we know that that is not going to really be affordable housing. And for the most part, these are typically expensive lots to build on, and the densities really don't lend themselves to affordable units. But we have identified a couple of larger sites. You can see the Windward Way site on the slide. That's zoned for medium density housing. This is off of Pelham in the Canal area. It was also listed in the last housing element. There are about 2 or 3, I think maybe 3 or sites like this where it's more than just an acre of land that's available for low or medium housing that's vacant. Next slide, please. So then we move into our higher density housing sites. These are sites that are zoned for above 30 units per acre. These do meet the state requirement for affordability. We've identified about the potential for about 500 units of housing. Almost all of these sites are already developed, but they tend to be developed with uses that use a small portion of the property, or their church properties, or underdeveloped properties, or properties where the existing use might remain, but there's a lot of empty space on the site where housing could potentially be accommodated without exceeding the zoning density. So you can see some examples of the hotels on Lincoln Avenue here on the slide. And these were also counted in the last housing element. Next slide. So the real significant opportunities are on our commercially zoned properties. And we do allow multifamily residential in our commercial zones. We've identified 29 housing sites on commercially zoned land with the capacity for about a little over 1,100 units. This excludes the projects that are already in the pipeline. So obviously Northgate is not counted in this number, but these are sites that have no project that's actively proposed that could potentially be redeveloped with housing based on certain metrics like the value of the improvement or the vacancy rate of the property. I believe we have a few examples on the next slide and the slide after that. We can go on to the next one. Here's an example of 2 new sites that are not in the current inventory that we're adding. These are both adjacent to the Smart Station at the Civic Center in North San Rafael. They're both mini warehouse or self-storage facilities. They have the added advantage of being right next to the transit station. The improvement values are relatively low. The coverage of the sites relative to what's permitted under zoning is relatively low. There's approved residential development nearby. So these are the kinds of sites that we're looking for that make sense as housing opportunity sites, particularly for affordable housing. Next slide. And here's a few other examples so you can kind of see an idea of what, without going through each of these individually. They're a bank that's been closed since the start of COVID, an office building that's completely vacant, a neighborhood market where the area of the building is very small compared to what's permitted under zoning. Sites like that could potentially redevelop as mixed use with the neighborhood market on the ground floor and housing above, for example, under existing zoning. Next slide. So we treated downtown as its own category, in part because there was a downtown precise plan that looked on a very fine grain at development opportunities. And the image that you see here on the screen, just for orientation, is on the far left is the intersection of 2nd and 4th at the beginning of Miracle Mile. That's the Montecito Shopping Center on the far right. So it's almost 1.5 miles from end to end, and about 0.5 mile from north to south. It's a large area, and we've identified the potential for about 1,500 additional housing units within this area. Much of that does have the opportunity to be designated as potential affordable housing based on the fact that the densities that are allowed are high. In fact, there isn't even a limit on the densities under the new zoning regulations. We're regulating using height limits and our new form-based code. So we are seeing a lot of interest in developing downtown. Again, the trick is how can we increase the percentage of units that are affordable given the competition for market rate housing and the demand, which we're seeing is very high. Next slide, please. Here are just some examples of sites in the downtown area. On the bottom left is the municipal parking lot at 3rd and Seahost. You can see the green wall of Soul Food in the background there, and that's 3rd Street in the foreground. And then another example is the Ace Garden Center on 4th Street in the West End Village area. We have about 50 sites in downtown San Rafael that have been identified that get us to that 1,500 unit number. Next slide, please. So an important factor to think about is we do have a B list, the sites that didn't make the cut. And they didn't make the cut for a reason. In many cases, you would look at one of these sites and think that should be a housing site, but there's a reason it's not. And for example, industrially zoned land, we have some fairly affirmative policies in the general plan about preserving our industrial land supply. We need those sites to generate jobs, to provide revenue, to provide services to residents of San Rafael and Marin County. So we're trying to avoid putting housing in the heart of our industrial area. Active big box shopping centers. So for example, Target or Staples or other things where there's an active retail presence that's still generating a lot of revenue for the city without a lot of housing in the vicinity. Those are not on the housing opportunity list. Our large car dealerships, which are again, revenue generators, many of those are actually in an area subject to sea level rise. We have Class A office buildings. These are the relatively new office buildings, even if there are high vacancies or there may not be a primary tenant. We're still looking at keeping those for employment generating uses in most cases. Sites with high improvement values. So if there's a site that has a building that's valued at well over the price of the land, we wouldn't have added it to our opportunity list. Or sites that could displace residents. So in many cases, we might find a site and think, wow, it's zoned multifamily, but there's only 10 units instead of the 30 there could be. We generally didn't put a site like that on the list because we don't want to displace people or result in the loss of housing in order to gain housing back that may not even be affordable or even organically affordable just by virtue of the fact that it's new and market rate. And finally, sites that would require general plan amendments, which we having just gone through a general plan update, are trying to avoid going back and revisiting sites that we've already done an environmental impact report to clear some of these sites for CEQA and have agreement that these are viable housing sites. Next, please. So just before we wrap up, just the other category, which we haven't talked about, is accessory dwelling units. We are projecting based on our last 3-year average or 4-year average of about 20 units per year. We're forecasting production of 25 accessory dwelling units per year for the next 8 years, which gets us another 200 units on top of the multifamily units. We actually have good data from ABAG on what ADUs typically rent for. About 35% of ADUs in the Bay Area are affordable to lower income households without subsidy, just by design, and they're often rented to multi-generational families and so on, which really helps meet some of our other housing goals. So ADUs are also really good for meeting our fair housing goals because they're geographically distributed. They are in our single family neighborhoods where we're trying to create more housing opportunities. Next slide, please. So when you add all of these different categories together, you actually see that we have the capacity for over 5,000 units of housing in San Rafael. Again, this is not a proposal to go out and build 5,000 housing units. It's essentially a capacity exercise that demonstrates to the state that we have done our job and planned for our fair share. Obviously, there's another step to this, which is the programs to actually get housing built. But just in terms of the numbers, we are in a good position with an adequate buffer and with enough capacity to meet our arena. Next slide, please. So we do have a series of maps, and I'll point out for the public that these are all online at sanrafaelhousing.org. We haven't presented all of the maps here in this presentation. This is just a sample of what they look like. This is North San Rafael, and you can see, for example, Northgate is the red shape in the center, slightly below the center, but the colors in this case correspond to the general plan designation of each of the sites. So the blue areas are office, the brown areas are multifamily, and so on. So this is just the underlying general plan designation on the sites that are listed in our inventory. Next slide. So we did have a meeting with the Planning Commission on July 26th, just a week ago, and presented this information to them. Some of the feedback we received at that meeting is questions about what incentives the city can create to support the development of these sites. One of the things that we observed is that many of the sites we identified 8 years ago when we went through the same exercise didn't actually develop. And then we saw housing on sites that were not in the inventory. So how can we do a better job of both predicting where our housing sites will be and then leveraging our resources to actually get some of our sites developed? Also linking our housing site efforts to our economic development efforts. Some of this is really the same thing. We're identifying sites that are opportunities for development, either for jobs or for housing. Also looking for opportunities to get multi-unit housing in single-family areas, encouraging residents to actually rent their ADUs when they get them permitted and built, as opposed to using them as a home office or guest quarters, which we have no control over. But the question is, are there ways that we can incentivize actual occupancy? And then also there was a comment to look at our school sites as potential areas for additional housing. Next slide, please. So our final slide just is an overview of upcoming meetings. And I do want to point out we had a meeting on July 14th where the public came and shared their thoughts on our housing sites. That included a similar presentation and some breakout group discussions. Our meeting on August 16th is focused more on housing programs. It is a Zoom workshop. We would strongly encourage everyone to attend. There is information on the website, sanrafaelhousing.org, about how to attend that meeting. We'll be putting a link up there in the next within the next week or so. We're continuing to do outreach through small group discussions and focus groups. We are available to do presentations to any civic organization that will have us. And we'll be coming back to the council, both with a working draft of the housing element to be submitted to the state. And then at the end of the year, with a public review draft that will be coming back to the council for adoption in early 2023. And I believe that's the last slide in the presentation. We're available to answer your questions or take comments and look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Excellent presentation. A lot of good information and representative of a lot of work the community has already done, as well as the Planning Commission. So thank you. I will entertain questions. Vice Mayor. Okay. Councilmember Hill.
Yeah, I have a few questions, and just to echo the mayor's comments, Barry, it's always great to have you here. My first question is if you could elaborate on the adverse consequences. I know that's listed in the slide, but I think it's good for the community to understand what it means if we're not compliant. And I think further in the staff report, you talked about how so many Southern California municipalities have been out of compliance. I think it was only 10% actually made the cut. So I think it'd be good for the community to understand what the consequences are for not having a responsive housing element.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So the initial consequences, you become ineligible for many state grants, and that many of the things that we rely on to fund our housing programs and even transportation programs would be lost. So that's the first and most immediate consequence. We also run the risk of litigation by housing advocacy groups or development interests, or by the state of California. And the state has successfully sued Huntington Beach and Encinitas recently because they didn't have adequate housing elements and prevailed. There are fines and penalties up to $100,000 a month for cities that are found to be out of compliance. They start at $10,000 and they go up to $100,000. And before anyone gets alarmed, I mean, these are very severe consequences. I think the idea at this point is we need to demonstrate that we're working toward compliance. And there are 176 jurisdictions out of compliance in Southern California that are working like mad to become compliant right now. And there are only 20 that have been found in compliant. They're a year ahead of us, so they've had some time. But the state is very serious about this and is litigating in some cases against cities that are not really doing their fair share.
Great, thank you. My next question is, can you comment on the 15 to 30% buffer? Where did that come from? And yeah, just let us know.
Sure. The 15 to 30% buffer is a guideline that's set by the state. So HCD came out with that recommendation about 2 years ago and essentially said, you can't just break even with your housing sites. You need to have extra sites because the likelihood that, well, first of all, it gives the city more flexibility to, if a great opportunity comes along, but it's a housing site, you don't want to always have to say, sorry, it's a housing site, you can't do that there. So this, basically the buffer is really for the city's benefit to provide some flexibility, but the percentage comes from the state and it's really most focused on the lower income sites. So the state is less interested in what your above moderate income buffer is, but they're very interested in making sure you have an adequate lower income buffer.
Great, thank you. And my final question is around the terminology of unevenness. How would we describe, is that an objective standard? How would you characterize unevenness? Because I can imagine what that could mean, but is there a way to establish an objective standard on unevenness?
Yes, it's a very objective standard. Actually, there are a whole series of maps that we're required to prepare and include in this element, showing the location of our housing sites overlaid on maps of income and percentage of income paid on housing and percentage of renters versus owners, and probably 20 or 30 different metrics that where the state reviewers will be looking for that to say, are you putting all of your lower income housing sites in the neighborhoods that already have your lowest income population? They don't want to see that. Are you not putting any affordable housing in your neighborhoods that have the highest income? Those are all measurable. And we do need to demonstrate in tables and maps that we're doing, taking this exercise seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Question. And thank you for being here. You always be able to describe everything so easily for us all to understand. Can we wonder if you could expand a little bit more on the discrepancy that you had talked about of sites that were identified and approved but not developed versus those that we never identified? Is that right? Is that the discrepancy?
Not exactly. It's sites that were in the housing element last time. Many of those sites were not developed. And then we saw many sites that were developed that weren't listed in the housing element. Because the housing element is our best estimate of where housing can go, but it's not an inventory of every single site in the city where housing can go. And what we saw in the last housing element is we missed a lot of the sites. So we're trying to get, how can we have a better predictive model for where housing will go, and looking at more different metrics that can help us make those decisions. And some of it is really who owns the property. When it's what it comes down to. And you try to be a little objective about that and not take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, if it's a developer that owns the property, it's more likely to be developed.
Right. And in terms of the projects as they start coming forward, is there a first recognition of where they fall on our inventory, like what we're talking about in terms of our housing element, so that we, as you were talking about incentives, or that we facilitate these projects a little more because they are ones that are made it to our element?
If it's a site that we counted last time, yes, we actually are required to kind of put them first and give them some streamlined opportunities if they provide 20% affordable units. That's the catch. So it's a deeper level of affordability that's required. If there are sites that we haven't identified before, it's kind of, there's nothing that's special that's given to those sites. I think, we maybe help the applicant if they can say, well, we're on the opportunity site list. But really, any site that is zoned and planned in a way that could accommodate multifamily can develop that way. So,
I just wanted to add that your council in the past has looked at ways for to facilitate or remove barriers to housing. And one of the things, the other pieces of this housing update is putting together a list of goals, policies, and programs that will allow some opportunity for us to look at ways for making development easier on those sites that have been identified. So there is an opportunity there.
And I just want to comment that the downtown precise plan and the tie-in with the infill opportunities is really helpful to be able to see those.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bushy.
I have some sort of strategic observations that I will make in the comment section, but right now I will confine myself to questions. My questions are about the 22 new sites. Do you reach out to the owners of those sites and inform them that they have been placed on this list?
It varies. We have not notified every single owner that they're on this list. That hasn't been done in the past. Many of the owners know that they're on the list, and we have communicated with some of the owners, but not all of them.
Okay, so that's just by happenstance. So let's talk then about what the ramifications of being placed on this list are.
Right.
And I wanted to take a specific example. You had mentioned that one of the housing sites that you had identified is the Ace Garden Center on 4th Street.
Right.
If, for example, the owner of that site were to come forward with an application to, say, construct an animal care facility on that site, would the fact that that site is on the housing opportunity list in any way constrain that application?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is it would not, but we would need to make sure when approving that project that we still had capacity on the remaining sites to meet those numbers, to meet our arena. So in other words, we can allow other types of development on those sites up to the point where we've run out of sites because we can no longer meet our 3,220 unit assignment. At that point, we would need to then add additional sites to our inventory.
Okay, but so it would not impact that specific application, but it would require additional work on the city's part to go find some alternative sites to keep our numbers up.
Eventually, it would. It wouldn't initially because we have that 30% buffer. As soon as we work through the end of our buffer, then we would need to begin replacing with new sites.
Okay, so then in the real world, the implications of being placed on this list for the property owners is that they are not constrained in any way.
Correct.
Although, of course, we would like them to bring housing forward. If they had some other alternative use for the property, it would not impede that. Director Judas.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that because our general plan already allows for residential development throughout most of the city, it would really simply be identifying another site. It wouldn't really be a heavy lift because we wouldn't have to, in other words, rezone or amend our general plan. It's just identifying that there's another site to kind of balance that additional those additional units. So yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a follow-up question. So building on what Councilmember Bush was talking about, with the sites that would be identified, would they need to be in the categories?
By income.
Yes,
yeah.
by income. Okay.
Right. And it would only apply to the lower income sites. So if the site was identified as above moderate, we wouldn't have to find a replacement.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. I just had one question, and that is once we've approved the housing element, is there a formal update that we have to give to the state or we're required and we get to give to the state a couple of years in just on progress? Is that also an additional stick that happens in a couple of years?
So we're required to do an annual progress report. And in some cases, not in San Rafael, but in some cases, a mid-cycle review is required. We're not subject to that requirement, but there are some communities that are. But the annual report is mandatory, and that is something we present to the council and file.
Okay. But there's not more, because you had said these are more stringent guidelines, but you haven't seen additional penalties that are being associated at this point with any of those annual report outs.
In some of the other communities, they're talking about conditional approval of housing elements with a midterm review 4 years in, where cities are basically saying, trust us, we'll rezone these parcels, and they want to make sure that they do.
Okay, thank you. We will see if there's additional questions and comments from the public. I will open it up. Anyone in the chambers like to address the council on this housing element agenda item? By Mr. Lorber.
and I'm a member of Catalyst Local Control. It's an organization that's based in the Mill Valley. It's a statewide organization, and we're opposed to what the state is doing to the community. First, I want to thank Barry for an incredible job that he is doing. He has done an excellent job at allocating the locations for the property that he has been assigned to do. An incredible number, almost impossible to accomplish. He's done a great job. We should really be proud of him and increase his staff and give him a pay raise too. But I am opposed to the city's response to how they handled arena numbers. The city should have stepped up, gone to the state and said, no, you can't take control of our local control like you're doing. That's against the Constitution. You modified the Constitution. You should have sued the state for what they're doing to the city. That's all I had to say.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else in the chambers? Yep. Happy to have you here. Go ahead. And if you could identify yourself, if you so choose.
Albuquerque, Gersel Park, Marin, 40 years. What does affordable mean? And I remember we did this 3-4 years ago, and there were two rather beautiful developments slated for Lincoln Avenue. Mission and Lincoln, I think, was one of them, and Second and Lincoln was the other. And if I remember correctly, neither one of them were developed because the bank refused to lend the city the money for the reason that it would reduce the rents in the area. One reason, the way I remember it. So I guess I empathize with you guys having to go through the effort you do to identify these things and then to develop them, because they are, it's not like there's a pile of money ready to develop the stuff and you need somebody to support you. And the fact, anyway, that's not a question, but it's more of a comment. I asked my 2 questions. Thank you.
And we welcome your comments as well. So thank you. Okay, thank you. Not seeing anyone else in the chambers. We'll see if there's any virtual comments.
If you're calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And if you're using Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. I do see a few hands raised.
Hi there, my name is Stuart Watson. Me and my family live in the Bret Harte neighborhood in San Rafael. And I want to say that we are in strong support of the housing element. Just a couple quick questions. First of all, as a statement, the housing issue is the everything problem, right? It causes a lot of woes in California. I'm quite disturbed by the fact that the gentleman that spoke first came up from Mill Valley to tell us that we can't build more housing in our beautiful city. I think everyone should have a right to buy or rent a home in this great town. Second of all, I do get like a little concerned. We don't talk about greater upzoning in general, in particular that the housing project, or rather the defunct bank on Ian 4th, for instance, does have some height requirements and things like that I know developers wouldn't develop on that site nearing the West End just because it doesn't actually have a level of density afforded to it in terms of our general plan. So I get a little worried about that, but in general, I just want to say thank you, Barry and team, for the work you're doing. And I really want to encourage everyone to think broader and wider in terms of support for housing. So thank you for the team, and go housing.
Hello again, Mayor Kate and council members. This is David Smith again. I've lived in Terralinda for 24, 25 years, and I think everybody agrees that there's a great need for housing in the city. But current proposals exist for development in Terralinda that make up almost 60% of the entire arena requirements, and that's in an area of between 2/3 and 1 square mile of Terralinda. That's almost 2,000 housing units in between 2/3 and 1 square mile. The cumulative effect of these proposals will be massive, and because they're so close to each other, this area of Terralinda will become almost a non-stop building site for year after year after year. None of the proposals currently include any infrastructure improvements, including requirements for evacuation routes for anywhere up to, I don't know, maybe up to 8,000 new residents. As I said at the start, we all agree that there is a massive need for housing, but should 2/3 of a square mile to 1 square mile be so burdened with 60% or almost 60% of the city's entire arena requirements? And that's my comments. Thank you.
Hello, this is Gregory Andrew. I live in San Rafael Meadows. This item is a housing issue, and Senate Bill 9 is a housing issue. Senate Bill 9 requires the city to require applicants of urban lot splits to sign an affidavit that they intend to occupy one of the houses for a minimum of 3 years. This requirement is excluded from the city's Ordinance 2013. I received a response from Ms. Gidice that the city will include the affidavit in a separate list of submittals. However, that does not explain why the requirement is conspicuously excluded from the ordinance. I compared all of the SB 9 requirements against the requirements that are included in the city ordinance, and every single requirement in SB 9 that is in SB 9 is in the ordinance, excepting this one. The ordinance excludes the requirement of Section G, which contains the requirement for developers to sign the affidavit that they will live in the houses that they build. The omission is glaring, and so I'm asking the city council to explain why this was the only requirement excluded from the ordinance. And also, how will you implement and enforce this requirement? I have also submitted a comment as a commentary on SB 9, pointing out that SB 9 and the ordinance make absolutely no requirement or provision for any of the new housing to be developed as affordable housing. Because of this, SB 9 and the city ordinance will not result in a single new affordable housing. All of the housing will be sold at market rate, giving developers windfall profits. While politicians and housing advocates may falsely claim that SB 9 and Ordinance 2013 are a solution for affordable housing and a way for families of municipal and emergency service employees to live where they work, there is nothing in the legislation or ordinance that will facilitate this false claim. Thank you.
I see no other hands raised, and I'll give everyone a moment. I see no further public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment and bring it back. I heard a few questions, and I'll just read the ones that I had written down. The definition of affordable housing. There was a question about the Lincoln projects at Mission and Second, very specific. I don't know if we have that information. The downtown plan, it's just upzoning in general. I think in the precise plan, again, trying to get at some of the broader ones. Focus on the Terra Linda site and how that interacts with both infrastructure such as evacuation, things like that. And then there was some confusion around SB 9, which we spoke about before, and Director Giudice can have some clarity at the end for that. So that is what I heard. Take them in any order, but
sure. Yeah, I might jumble them a little bit. But the what is affordable is a great question, and it really varies depending on the number of people in your household, and also whether we're talking about affordable to a lower income household and a moderate income household and so forth. So typically it's any housing that is 30% or less of your income is the threshold that we use to determine what's affordable. There are some specific numbers that the County of Marin uses. I think a lower income household is a household of 4 earning less than about $140,000 a year. And if you take a third of or 30% of that and divide it by 12, that's your affordable monthly housing cost for that unit. I mean, I think it's from, in most cases, it's housing that receives some kind of subsidy required. It's multiple answers to, it's a complicated question and a complicated answer. Thanks. Let's see, the question about the Lincoln Avenue projects, I believe I'm familiar with both of those projects, and I don't know if Director Giudice may want to address the status of, I think it's the Mission and Lincoln and the third and the 703 third.
Good questions. So the Aegis property came in for an extension late last year, and that was approved. We haven't heard from them since. We did have an application for a building permit submitted, but that has not been, nothing's progressed for a number of months now. 703 3rd Street applicants have connected with us on a number of occasions. They continue to state that they're planning on coming forward with a project. They're exploring, different opportunities because of availability of materials. They're looking at alternatives. So I haven't heard from them in a couple of months, but I know that they're exploring. And
thank you. And just to clarify, these are not ones that are being financed by the city. I think there was a confusion there. So we had nothing to do with the loans. These are, again, what's always challenging about it is we can identify sites, but ultimately it is developers that bring things forward and have to get it financed and deal with resource supplies and everything else. So
that's correct. Yes,
okay.
The city doesn't develop housing, so we just can try to accommodate it and hope that and encourage development on certain sites. But yeah, we don't develop sites.
Right.
And I'm happy to discuss the question about the SB9, the ordinance.
Yeah, go ahead.
And how we intend on implementing the requirements under SB9. Under page 13 of the ordinance, it does reference the section of the government code that requires, that sets out the requirements. We can't change certain mandates. We fully intend on adding that as a submittal requirement as part of our application packet. There are a number of other submittal requirements that are going to be listed on our website. To list them all leaves us little flexibility in terms of, as we kind of process applications, we will make adjustments to those submittal requirements. That said, like I mentioned, we can't change that. We are going to be requiring a signed affidavit. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes. No, we knew that the staff had covered that. So thank you for that clarification.
Can I clarify further? In other instances, Director Giudice, where the state mandates something, is it always in our ordinances, or are we able to satisfy law in terms of how we implement it in the policy?
We don't have everything that the state has as a mandate to us in our ordinances. I mean, we try to incorporate as much as we can in a way that is easier to read. But with the amount of changes that have occurred over the past several years or a few years related to housing legislation, there are some things that are not in our ordinance that we still are obligated to abide by. One example is the JADU ordinance. We don't have a owner occupancy requirement in our ordinance itself, but we do have it. I mean, we're obligated to require that. So we are requiring that be submitted as part of the application packet.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there were two more questions, one around upzoning of the downtown plan and then the focus on the Terra Linda sites.
Sure. Just very quickly on the downtown plan, I think we recognize that there was a constraint in the existing zoning, which is part of why we did that precise plan. And the zoning that was adopted by council last year in August really was strategically designed to address that exact constraint. And we're seeing a lot more development activity and development proposals now as a result of that. So I think we're on that one and we're working on it. As far as the Terra Linda area, North San Rafael in general has about a third of the capacity. Downtown has about a third of the capacity. And then Central and Southeast San Rafael has about a third. So we do have it geographically distributed. We have a large buffer, which is why maybe seems like 60%, but that's of the base number, not counting the buffer. I also wanted to just say that we did an EIR for the general plan that looked at infrastructure, looked at traffic and circulation, and it looked at the cumulative effect of all of these projects. So that was really the intent of the of the general plan EIR, was to say, if all of this is built, what is the effect on our utilities and circulation and various systems? So that's covered in that, and there are mitigation measures in that document.
Thank you. So I'll turn to my colleagues for additional comments. Vice Mayor?
Well, I'd like to see, we definitely need housing. So it's great to see the report. I'm wondering with the on the, let's see, I'm looking at the mixed use non-downtown sites, because there's a lot there where the zoning is not aligned. And I'm wondering if the perspective is focus on larger projects or focus on smaller projects. And, you know, it's how are we going to get to our numbers, our RHNA numbers? And there are a number of smaller ones, but there are also some larger projects here. And if we're going to have, I mean, I'm fairly certain the answer is going to be we need to have a combination of both to be able to make our RHNA numbers. In terms of the zoning changes, we have a number of units associated with office zoning. And I think, you know, per our earlier conversation about the animal facilities, what ordinances do we need to look at earlier than later to support the fact that they have to tie with these RHNA numbers and with our need to support the housing? So I'm sort of a curious question, but also more of a comment in terms of, I think we're going to have to start seeing more changes in our ordinances to support the need for our housing. Because I think if we're going to actually see that progress in housing, it's going to get tied up in the amount of work that has to be done to change the ordinance if it's a one by one request.
I don't know if there's a question as
Not
well
really,
as a comment.
well, unless there's a magic answer in terms of what ordinances would you suggest that need to come forward sooner than later to support the RHNA needs?
Yeah, I think the one thing I do want to add is that the office zoning allows housing by right. So we don't actually have to rezone those properties unless we want to keep office out. I mean, that's kind of the other side of the policy question is, do you want to change the zoning to multifamily residential? But I think we're trying to keep it flexible so it can be either one.
Okay.
So that's the kind of the path that we're going down. But the zoning doesn't need to change on most of those properties.
Right.
Something that I just wanted to add, because it's something Barry and I have talked about with the high density residential zoning districts. There's a range of densities that are allowed depending on whether you're HR 1.8 or HR 1, but the general plan allows up to, I think it's 42 units per acre. But when you dig down into the zoning district, there's a range that really sometimes doesn't allow for the maximum allowed. And so we've talked about, well, maybe that's something like that would be an easy change that, wouldn't really change what you're allowing on that site, but would allow for more density on that site.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something we've talked about. We haven't really progressed beyond that because we haven't really evaluated all of those sites and what that would mean. But
right. I think it's going to be important for us as a council to be able to make sure we've done what is needed to ensure that we can move projects forward as they are the right projects forward as they come forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Bushy.
Yeah, I would like to follow up and build on the Vice Mayor's questions. And to do that, we have to go back to the foundation and remember what we're doing here. I have the advantage of having been doing this for several decades now, more than I'd like to care to admit. But we have to remember that we're just looking to demonstrate that we have sufficient housing capacity on a planning basis. This is more of a concept or a theoretical basis, and we're operating in a world of just planning. It's not that we need to meet our RHNA numbers in the actual real world. That's not the requirement. The requirement is only on a planning basis. That said, I can offer my observation that over the years, and certainly now, I have noticed that the requirements have gotten more strict, if you will. Some of our planning assumptions from many years ago were not as realistic as they probably should have been. So we do need to be more realistic in our planning, and I think we're doing that. That said, though, remember, this is just on a planning basis. The city is not a developer. This is a planning exercise, not a housing siting exercise. That said, we have in fact engaged in actual planning, I don't want to use that word, in actual review of our processes for real housing developments. That's what we went through. Like starting in 2017, took a hard look at what we're doing for real life developers that are coming to us with proposals. And that process is what led to the changes in our inclusionary housing requirement, as well as our processing requirements with the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission. Those are two separate endeavors that we need to keep separate in our mind, because we don't want them to overlap and get confused. So I just wanted to bring that forward, to keep those two things separate, and also to remind us that we have other objectives as well in our housing requirements. Just for example, maybe because there's rain falling today, I was thinking of water and thinking of for example, the Los Gamos property that came forward in some ways somewhat unexpected, but a wonderful project, in that it included the use of recycled water for both outdoor irrigation as well as the toilet plumbing. And that is the need for efficiently using non-potable water in our housing sites is another strategic objective that we have that is broader and needs to be incorporated in all of our endeavors. So I completely support the report as it has been presented. I just offer my comments as setting a broader context for what this is, and I think more importantly for our purposes, what it is not.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Hill.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Bushy, for those comments. I would agree with everything that you have said, and add just to focus on Barry Miller's efforts and how it has really orchestrated so many things to date. Housing Element is the latest, and building on Councilmember Bushy's comments, the general plan process started several years ago just to get that going. And this is the latest addition to that. The Downtown Precise Plan required a lot of intentionality as we transitioned to a form-based code that was no small feat, and has allowed for, I think, more consistency and more modern ways of thinking. As I recall, and this was the teaching that I think I took away from how you described it at the time, was to make sure we're talking about not what we can't do, but what we're actually allowed to do, and make that more consistent as we go forward. Appreciate the intentionality of forming the 13-member working group. I appreciate the intentionality of that as well. I will also say thank you. It was buried in the staff report, but I will call it out, that the council was directed to read the summary of housing element review letters, learning from Southern California and Sacramento. And when I was looking through all the failed plans, the most of them were things that we were already doing to mitigate. So I appreciate you taking the failings of others and applying it here in a positive way to make sure that we were mitigating our position. So appreciate that, Barry Miller. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, excellent comments. One of the first things you said at the beginning of your presentation is that we could meet our regional housing need allocation, RHNA, without amending our zoning map. And that, to me, really states up front how this has been a pro-housing council and staff. We want to have a diverse community, an inclusive community at all different economic levels, which is why we have not joined in any lawsuits against ABAG, whether you agree with the process or not. We believed that as a community committed to housing, having the ability to do it. I mean, the fact is, these are units that have been identified and you've added new ones. So I'm very proud of that about San Rafael. I'm proud that, as Councilmember Bushy talked about, we've looked at how do we change or modify our systems and processes. So yes, something's developed by the Planning Commission, but how does it actually bear fruit and be built? So we'll continue. I know from that discussion that we had, I think a year ago, we will be going back and looking at, wow, those tinkering that we did it start to result in different units? So this is an ongoing, this is an ongoing conversation that we'll continue to check in on. And finally, I wanted to close with the website, the www.sanrafaelhousing.org. Is that right? So for anyone else who's interested, I mean, this is a community value, I believe. And so really having our community show up and support or not, we are open to all input, but having a conversation around how does housing, what does it mean to our community? So do show up at the community meetings. It will be at Zoom. You can always write and of course call into any council meeting. So with that, we appreciate, let me see, it's a report. And I know this is not a final acceptance, this is an update. You'll be coming back for an approval at the end of this year, if I understood it correctly. So with that, I will request a motion on this item.
I move that we accept the report on 2023 to 2031 Housing Element Opportunity Site Inventory.
Second the motion.
It's moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 4-0. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Director Giudice and Leslie. I don't know if she's here, but for all the work that you've done to date. So thank you.
Thank you.
Switching gears, this is one of those meetings where this is local government action. We've talked about animals, we've talked about housing, and now we're talking about the grand jury report on electrifying Marin's building. So glad you are here, Corey, and I will turn it over to you when you're ready. Wait, make it bigger. Thank you, City Clerk. All right, Corey, take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for your time tonight. This is a grand jury response to the recent report, Electrifying Marin's Buildings, a County-Wide Approach. And I'll just start by saying that Director Giudice is here, and on Zoom is Don Jepson, our Chief Building Official, for questions or comments later. So tonight's presentation is just a quick outline about what I'm going to present on, what we're required to do for the grand jury, what green building reach codes are all about, give you a little bit of a framework and background, what's been taking place to date, because we were working on this most of the year, a timeline for what's next, and then we'll just talk about the grand jury response. So first of all, what this is and what this isn't. This is not adopting green building reach codes tonight. This is not about diving deep into all of those and all of the pros and cons and challenges and that. What it is about getting back to the grand jury in time in the 90-day period. And since we don't have a second meeting in August, we are up very early here so that you can hear this and give some feedback and we can give an adequate response. So a little bit about green building, and I'm sure you read this in the grand jury's report, but every 3-year code cycle, we have new green building requirements that we need to adopt and implement, and that's mainly for health and safety concerns in terms of buildings, health, occupancy, air quality, GHG emissions reductions, conservation of water and things like that. The state provides the codes and then provides optional reach codes that we can consider as well. Consideration of reach codes is in our climate action plan. It's in all the climate action plans around the county. In addition to that, in our climate action plan is about implementation of reach codes and how do we actually make sure that they work post-adoption. Typically, the county leads a county-wide model reach code development project. This year, early on, we asked to participate in that project. The town of San Anselmo and MCE Clean Energy joined that steering committee as well, and we're working together to try to uncover all the challenges and opportunities in the reach codes to try to make them the best they can possibly be. Also, I'd like to clarify that often when we're talking about it, when I'm talking to folks in the community, they get these mixed up, and I want to be really clear. It's about two different things: electrification of new construction. And then in terms of existing buildings and remodels, it's about applying these reach codes that are really about extra energy efficiency. So in new construction, you may have different types of properties or building types that it applies to, or potentially excludes. In remodels, the state's provided two things, Tier 1 and Tier 2, which are typically all the measures and making them more stringent. And this year they provided what's called a flex measures tool. It's a scoring tool that cities can sort of set the level at, low, medium, or high, and it provides a score. And much like resilient neighborhoods, it's a menu of opportunities. You look at them, you try to figure out what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that you may need to do that get you to that score, and it preferences electric appliances. So often, unless you have a really high, you set it at a really high threshold, you can meet your point totals simply by replacing an appliance with an electric appliance. And there are other options we're looking at as well locally. So the goal of this countywide reach code project is twofold. One is to develop model reach codes. The idea here is to work with folks in the community, stakeholders, and come up with some model reach codes. And then if possible, to align them as much as possible across jurisdictions. Because what we hear from builders is, if every counter I go to is different, it makes it harder and it's more of an obstacle for us to get things built. So in the Reach Code project to date, what we've done is we did some stakeholder mapping and identified all the key stakeholders we felt like we needed to engage with. We've done engagements with most of them. We've done focus groups, some public engagements. We have a city council subcommittee, Councilmember Bushy and Joran Scolati, and we met once a couple of months ago and intend to meet again the end of this week. We're conducting an analysis that's based on questions and comments and concerns that came up in that initial meeting, as well as from what we've heard from these stakeholders. And we've given presentations both in public and to groups like Marin Conservation League and the Marin Managers Association and such. So this analysis that I'm talking about really addresses 3 key issues. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to all of them and they all go down rabbit holes, but really about, what's the bang for the buck? If we adopt reach codes, are we really going to get good greenhouse gas reductions? What are the alternatives and things that really make sure that we get the maximum that we can? What is the cost effectiveness of these measures? Now, the Flex Measures tool is a cost-effective tool, so all those measures have been deemed to be cost-effective in our climate zone. But what is the ROI? In some cases, some building types, it may be more expensive. In some cases, not as much. And then resiliency. We all know about public safety power shutoffs and other power outages, and how do we make sure that there's resiliency if you move from mixed fuel to a single fuel building? So next steps and timeline are to complete the analysis this month. We'll have, as I mentioned, a council subcommittee review at the end of this week to the data that we have so far and where our analysis sits. Drafting of the codes is happening this month by the county. The intention is to come back to a council study session next month so we can really dig into the codes and all the questions and concerns that you might have, so that we can bring something at least by the second meeting of October so that things are adopted for a January 1st implementation date. So now we'll go back to what this is about, which is the grand jury response. And so the findings, met with Director Giudice and Don Jepson and reviewed the findings and basically came up with, in general, although there's some nuance, all the findings seemed to be, we felt comfortable agreeing to all of them, and that is it's necessary to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals in our climate action plans. And natural gas in buildings needs to be reduced or eliminated in order to do so. That methane gas is dangerous and causes adverse health impacts in some conditions. Greenhouse gas reductions from buildings will require in-depth, comprehensive, and coordinated planning, and that speaks to that implementation piece. Underserved and lower income communities will require extra financial support to be able to benefit from the benefits of electrification and increased energy efficiency. And then timely electrification of existing buildings will require some mandatory measures supported in some cases by subsidies and incentives. And then in terms of the recommendations, we've listed them all right now as requires further analysis. And again, one of the reasons for that is we're just not far enough along in the process. We haven't really met with you. We haven't had our second subcommittee meeting. We haven't finished the analysis. We just got the new green building codes 2 weeks ago. So we haven't even dug into tier 1 and tier 2 that much yet. And run basically an analysis on our typical building types here in San Rafael. And then in terms of R3, I'll just call out one thing, because I know we did get at least one comment letter about this, is that it does seem, and as in our engagements with the chief building officials, that, and in our climate action plan, we called it out as well a few years ago, was that codes don't just do it. You have to have a portfolio approach. You need to be able to implement it well. You need good incentives. You need outreach, engagement. You need to make sure there's technical assistance if you're going to make sure that they're successful. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for questions and public comment. And like I said, Don Jepson is on Zoom to be able to answer any questions, and the Director Judice is here as well.
Thank you. I especially appreciate the differentiation about what's before us this evening, which is the grand jury report, and how we have future opportunities in September and October to dig in further to the REACH codes. So questions regarding the grand jury response, Vice Mayor?
I think my only question would be, of the 3 recommendations, what would you consider, if you had to prioritize? What would you prioritize of the, I mean, it's a little bit outside of the finding. I mean, we recognize that these are the recommendations, but if we're going to put more focus into of the recommendations at certain levels, where would we be putting more of our attention of those?
Well, I would just say that we've been putting a lot of attention into the REACH code process already this year. The REACH code process will most likely end by the end of the year, and then the next step is to really implement it well, right? I mean, one of the benefits of our building counter and what Don and his crew have put together is that the contractors recognize how easy it is here compared to some other places. And we need to make sure that we keep it simple and that we provide the resources to folks to be able to implement it well, and to be able to switch to electric appliances or conduct better energy efficiency measures to make sure it's successful and cost effective.
And do you see the alignment across the county going to be possible?
Oh, I wish.
Sorry.
And I will say this, that I learned myself, and Don could speak to this too, is that the building stock is very different. So what's going on in Fairfax is very different than what goes on San Rafael, which is very different than what's happening in the county of Marin. So looking at that building stock, and to our last presentation of what we expect to be building, the considerations are different. The one similarity is that people need resources and assistance. When you're changing technologies and you're trying new things and you're pushing the envelope, you need to be able to provide people with resources to be able to do it well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that Don has joined us, so feel free to wave or pipe up anytime. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Corey, so I thought that slide was great, talking about the 3 areas around GHG reduction, cost effectiveness, and resilience. All 3 I think are very important. I can draw in my own mind, at least, a through line to GHG reduction as being a prime directive. The other ones are obviously supportive. Just by my own experience, when I think about resilience during the PSPS, as you called out earlier, I'm sure this is going to go into the analysis, but maybe you can give us a very brief preview, especially on resilience. What are the plausible mechanisms we could see in our community if we were starting to convert toward single fuel residences? I know that during previous PSPSs, and I'll just say I am not electrified, I do have a gas range, and that was very helpful during an outage that lasted for more than 24 hours to be able to cook. So I guess, when I think about that spread across, 60,000 some odd residents here in San Rafael, I can see that being very disruptive. We don't have a plan in place. So maybe you can just give us a preview. I'm sure it's going to go into the full analysis.
Sure. So there's several answers to that question. First is to remember that even if the REACH codes are adopted, this is going to be incremental over time. Everybody's not going electric tomorrow. Again, we're talking about 2 different things: electrification for new buildings versus energy efficiency requirements, additional energy efficiency requirements, and potential electrification for remodels. And when we look at our building stock and what's coming, in terms of single family homes, the battery backup for that and isolating circuits, not that big a deal, right? But when it comes to multifamily developments, it's a very different consideration, right? And so there's a potential for exempting emergency power. So one suggestion Don has been talking about is exempting it, either methane gas or anything else for emergency power. Propane is actually taking off as a backup power source, much less greenhouse gas emissions, much quieter, and you don't have to run it like diesel generators over and over again to keep it charged and working properly. So it just, the building type is part of it. The other is we've been told by PG&E came here to this council a few years ago and said, we don't really anticipate any public safety power shutoffs here anymore. We've hardened the lines. We don't really see that. Now, giant mega fire, all bets are off for any of us, right? And in terms of power outages right now, PG&E's just issued a report that showed the reduction in amount of time in power shutoffs. So if you think about what is it that you're going to need, well, maybe it's space heating during the winter. So if there's a power outage, but if the average power outage is maybe an hour or two or three, hot water heaters hold the hot water for a while. So cooking is one of the issues for sure. That's one of the issues. The other is that in terms of gas heating, you still need electricity to fire it up in most cases. So there's a lot of considerations around that. So to your point, it'll be in the analysis, and what part of it is just trying to figure out how to boil down all this data and all these things into sort of clear pictures by building type. So we can really understand what does it mean for multifamily, small, multifamily, large, commercial, single family, and ADUs.
That was great. Thank you.
Don, did you want to add anything to that? I'm sorry. I kept remembering that Don's on the...
No, we can see him right behind you.
Yeah. I think it's a complicated issue. We want to make sure that we take in account everyone. I myself was in the dark in my apartment that's all electric without being able to cook or have hot water, which was very annoying. And then we also know we have people in the community that might have medical needs too. And while they can go to battery backup, at this point it is also kind of expensive. So we need to, I think, take the take small steps, kind of like what Corey was saying, and probably this will get developed over a period of time on existing housing stock. And hopefully we will get good input from the community on how quickly we should move and how deep we should go into those weeds.
Thank you. And that is one reason why we will have the study session in September, is to really unpack that. I mean, that was a great question. We're not going to get to that level of detail this evening, but we'll have a study session before it comes before the council in October, just for that reason, because we knew that we needed that additional conversation. Councilmember Bushy.
Thank you. I appreciate this sort of discussion on the broader topic because it will inform our considerations as we prepare for that study session in September. However, as a former grand jury member myself, I tend to drill down in on the exact details of the grand jury report that is in front of us. And I would like to draw your attention, Corey, to findings 2 and findings 3. Those two findings, in my reading of them, are highly technical findings that I would expect to be supported by a fairly detailed technical analysis. And I was wondering if such analysis were presented to us.
By the grand jury?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't believe that they presented a detailed technical. That's not what they're showing in their references.
Right, and I would have been surprised if it had been based on my experience. I'm uncomfortable with the text of these findings because they are making what I would expect to be well-supported technical assertions, and I see in our response that we are agreeing with them. So because they didn't present a technical analysis, I presume that we did not prepare one. Is that a fair assumption?
That we did not prepare a technical analysis? No.
Right. So I don't know that we are in a position to agree with those highly technical statements. So I'm wondering, is there, Yeah, there's
Say
some sort
partially
of,
agree.
yeah, isn't there some sort of a middle ground of
Partially agree.
partially agree, or I think we conceptually agree,
Mhm.
but we don't have the technical support to completely agree. Or is there some sort of we're not in a position to make an evaluation?
Well, it says we disagree wholly or partially with the findings numbered. Now, although we haven't done a technical assessment, there's definitely a lot more information out there than just what the grand jury reported on. And we did meet as a team and reviewed these recommendations together. We have heard from other folks as well about this. The state has been putting out this information as well. These are the same findings that were supported by more technical analysis by Berkeley and other cities. So although we haven't done a detailed analysis of that, based on some other things that we've read, we felt comfortable with it.
Okay, so and all right, and is that how we normally do things?
What's the concern?
My concern is that we're agreeing with statements that will dramatically reduce. I mean, these are very broad, sweeping statements made by organizations that are not assigned responsibility for health and safety, evaluating health and safety risks. I'm not sure that we should be agreeing with things that we don't have the analysis to support, and that we haven't been presented with it. We sort of think that maybe it's out there somewhere, but we haven't actually seen it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I could have referenced more of the studies out there and more of the reports that I've seen. And I can't call them up on my fingertips. But, they'll reference things like, for instance, the health effects around the natural gas peaker plants and the plants that are producing the natural gas, so that the people that are surrounding them, which I was just reading an article yesterday about that in AP News in Texas, which most of our natural gas comes from, apparently. And I've also, they'll reference things like the San Bruno gas line break and those types of things. So although, like I said, we don't have a technical analysis, there's a lot more than just what they referenced out there. On the other hand, if you're not comfortable with that, we can revise the response as well.
Yeah. What would be the downside to partially agreeing with it?
Well, I guess it's the way it's written. We disagree wholly or partially.
Okay.
So, I don't know. It's nuanced.
Is it possible, and I don't know if this is a question for the city attorney's office, we say agree, but can we put, I want to say a caveat, can we put something that explains after? So on F1 and F2, agree, and when I see city attorney Epstein is there, to reference that exact point, that what studies are being utilized, just so we're not blindly. I think that's what your concern, it sounds like that's what the concern is. City attorney?
Can you just run it by me one more time, please, Mayor Kate, what you're proposing?
Actually, I will turn over to Councilwoman Bushy because it's her concern.
Findings 2 and 3 are highly technical in nature and sweeping, and do not have specific supporting evidentiary presentation. And when we agree with them without having that sort of support, it seems, as the mayor described, blindly agreeing with something. Is there some kind of middle ground that we can respond that is not a comprehensive agreement?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have the rules on responding to grand jury reports at the ready here, but I believe what we can do is to say agree subject to the deference we're making to those who are the experts on this, which we're not purporting to be by agreeing with this statement. We're agreeing with the representation that's being made without presuming that we have expertise that we don't. If I'm correct that we are, if Don's agreeing with me that we don't have that expertise in-house, and we don't have the ability to just say, yes, we agree that that's true. I heard your concerns earlier about, substantial reduction and things like that. If we don't really know that, I understand your point, Councilmember Bushy. So I'm kind of struggling with the language to deal with the qualification as well. But I don't see a legal impediment. I just think we need to come up with a good way to reflect your concern.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, just to chime in, we can partially agree to their findings and provide some sort of clarification as to why it's partial. And I think, Councilmember Bushy, your point is that they're broad, somewhat vague statements that, again, we may conceptually agree with, but without really specific data that draws to how they came to those conclusions. Your concern is, wholly agreement to that without that substantiation is in question. So we have done that in the past. We have said partially agree and made that clarification that, we're in agreement with the theory and the basis of what we're trying to do here as it relates to electrification, but we can make that adjustment to our response.
Yeah, if I may, I'd suggest perhaps, and Christine reminds me, we have put partial agreement before. We could say partially agree, and the city, agrees with the statement as framed, but has no basis to confirm the validity of the underlying data upon which it's based. Something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? I don't have any questions. That's a great point. Thank you for that clarification. We'll see if I will open the public comment on this item. Is there anyone in the chambers who would like to comment? Come on down.
Good evening, Mayor Kate Collin and council members. My name is Arlen Benavides, and it's good to be here in person with all of you. I just wanted to comment and say that those were really interesting findings, considerations that Corey presented in his presentation, which I'm really curious about. But I think my comment today was really focused on the good of this REACH code. And what I was thinking was that it's so strange. It's very strange that even today we had a president not too long ago that didn't believe in climate change. And yet the signs of climate change are so real today in all our lives. And it's so good here in Marin County that we have programs and initiatives and policies that aim to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yet we need more intention and effort in transportation and housing to reduce our emissions in these areas. And I think it's great too that we have climate action plans that identify our emissions and identify recommendations on how people can take action locally and individually. Yet these climate action plans don't actually make it more affordable or easier for low-income housing families to take action or to make sustainable decisions. And I think this is where the foundation of Sustainable Sarasville's comment takes place. Electrifying new housing and those being remodeled in the future not only concurs with the EIR for the general plan, but that calls for electrification of building systems, but it amplifies the opportunity for more people to continue addressing climate change. And I believe that it's not a REACH code, but rather a timely decision that we can make, one that can create ripples of change. And that's why Sustainable Sarasville recommends that in your response to the grand jury, you commit to the recommendations of R1, R2, and R3. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all that Sustainable Sarasville does. Anyone else in the chambers? Not seeing anyone? Or sorry, anyone who would like to comment virtually?
If you'd like to provide public comment and you're calling in, you can press star 9 now to raise your hand. And if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. I do see hands raised.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Great. My name is David Mahler, and I'm representing the 50 members of the Marin-Sonoma Building Electrification Squad, and several of these members live in San Rafael. I'd like to say that in general, we support the proposed response to the Marin County Civil Grand Jury report that was included with staff's report. but we believe it should be revised in one specific regard, and that is that it make more of a commitment and show more leadership. In particular, the proposed response seems to make San Rafael's participation in developing a Marin countywide building electrification plan, which is recommendation R3, conditional on the 11 other Marin jurisdictions also agreeing, participating, contributing, and committing to implement. While these are reasonable aspirations, they should not be a threshold conditions for San Rafael's participation in developing the plan. If one or even a few of the smaller jurisdictions did not participate, it's hard to see how that would eliminate all value for the participating and implementing jurisdictions. San Rafael, as you know, is one of only 2 larger jurisdictions in Marin County, and it's the first to publicly present and discuss its response to the civil grand jury's report and its recommendations. As such, San Rafael's response is likely to influence the actions and responses of the other jurisdictions. We recommend that San Rafael take a strong leadership position and encourage the other jurisdictions to join with it. The civil grand jury's report represents a great opportunity to accelerate countywide actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and recommends a path to do so. This is not the time or subject for timidity. It's the time and subject to take action and to lead. Rather than conditioning its response on the actions of others, we urge San Rafael to revise its response to make a strong commitment to participate in the joint effort to timely.
Thank you. And we also received your letter earlier today, too.
Hi, this is Ken Strong. Am I up next?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, this is Ken Strong. I live in Greenbrae. I'm one of the authors of the letter from the Marin Conservation League that is part of your packet on this matter, along with Bill Carney of Sustainable San Rafael. And the only additional point I would like to make is that in connection with the conversation about the technical nature of some of the findings in the grand jury report, I would just point out that the grand jury report is extensively footnoted, particularly as it relates to this issue. I believe it was finding 3 of the health impacts, indoor health impacts of natural gas, citing a Rocky Mountain Institute study and some other technical journals. So it wasn't that the grand jury just kind of made this up out of whole cloth without citing to some fairly technical sources. And I would just wanted to call that to your attention and urge, consistent with our letter, that the City Council accept all the findings and recommendations of the grand jury. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Kate Kershevsky, and I'm a 35-year resident of San Rafael. I agree with the 2 previous speakers, and so I urge the City Council to commit when they respond to the grand jury, to commit to developing a program to, 1, put electricity, of course, in all new buildings. That's kind of, I'm not sure if that's in code yet. And also to incentivize electricity for existing renovations so that we gradually electrify and make it affordable for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
This is Belle Cole with the Organizing for Action in Marin, and I support the previous speakers, and I have sent you a letter with my own justifying that position. And I think that I just want to urge you to follow the grand jury recommendations R1 and R2 and adopt a REACH code requiring new buildings to be all electric, and also incentives for electrification when renovating existing buildings, which is before you. I also wanted to mention one other thing that I did put in my letter, which is that if in fact there is going to be new legislation at the federal level, and they're certainly available at the state level, there'll be substantial resources to fund many of these initiatives that are being proposed in the grand jury report. And I think it's a huge opportunity, a great opportunity for San Rafael to move quickly and be a leader and be the first one to accept this position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Belle.
Hi, my name is Pam Reeves, and I live in San Rafael, and I'm here on behalf of Marin Conservation League, which was invited to participate in one of the focus groups. And I just first want to say how extremely grateful we all are that Corey Bidoff is our sustainability coordinator, and the incredibly hard work that he does, and the really excellent staff report that he gave forward to you. And I want to underscore something that Corey said, that what I discovered at that focus meeting was how really folks lack education about the resources that are out there, about the technology. I'm currently heading the Marin Green Home Tour that's coming up, and I can tell you that the technology that's available now and in the near future will provide resiliency that you just can't believe how incredible it is, and that MCE is currently providing battery generators to folks who can't afford backup when they need medical devices electrified. So that I would urge you, just because you might not be up to speed, because very few people are, as much as Corey and folks like the people who've spoken and myself, that getting education and incentives is what we drastically need now, or the trouble we will be in is just too enormous to comprehend. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pam.
I see no other hands raised. I'll give everyone a moment. I see no further public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment, and we got great input. I didn't hear, I heard kind of a quasi question and input, and that was San Rafael and how our actions, if we're taking them in lockstep or with other cities, or if we do things on our own. I think if you could provide further clarity around that. And I think it's a little bit of a separate than the response in the grand jury report, because that's very specific terminology that we're dealing with. But to me, the question behind was, will San Rafael, or how will San Rafael proceed if you have other jurisdictions that aren't? If you could speak to that.
So, sure. Currently, San and Someone Fairfax have already adopted all electric new construction. And they're reviewing, as well as many other jurisdictions right now, reviewing the flex measures tool, tier 1 and tier 2, and other options. So we're participating with them. I don't know that there's necessarily following San Rafael, except for this, is that we've committed to do this analysis. And we will share that with others as well. So I think that will inform their process to some degree as well.
Thank you. And would you also add that with using our climate change action plan, we are committed to certain goals that aren't dependent on what our neighbors are doing. We're going to keep going forward, even if they're not going to go forward, because we have continued. I think we were the first Marin County jurisdiction to adopt a climate change action plan.
I think second.
Second? Oh, okay. We were the first to receive a Beacon Award.
There you go.
For our climate change action plan. But I wanted to get at that, because to me, I was hearing that we weren't going to move forward unless it was all countywide, and I don't think that's totally accurate.
So that was in reference to recommendation 3, which, part of this was coming so early and not being able to have this review, but I didn't want to get out ahead of council decisions, right? So that was really important. And so the one thing about recommendation 3, as we said in our climate action plan, is the implementation is really important. And I think that's what recommendation 3 is really pointing at. I think the reservation there was to develop a big plan and do a huge planning process, when really we know what a lot of the obstacles are. And we feel like an action plan might be a better thing. So just in terms of recommendations, I think that if what I'm also hearing from some of the chief building officials is, geez, if you do adopt 1 and 2, I hope you'll agree to, move forward with 3 and make sure that the implementation goes well and the resources are there, the technical assistance. So in terms of that, I think that's something that we would want to do. If we adopt REACH codes, and even if we don't, I think we would want to help with the implementation and make sure that it goes well and smoothly, and that we help people get to greenhouse gas reductions and more resiliency and safety in the future for buildings. So,
yeah, thank you.
And Mayor Kay,
Yes.
I've asked the city attorney, Rob Epstein, to provide a clarification about the very specific language if there were to be a motion to make an edit to those responses on finding 2 and 3, because there is specific language. The grand jury only allows us to partially disagree. It doesn't allow for a partial agree, which is essentially the same thing, but it's a nuance in what you would need to make a motion around. So I think the city attorney is going to give you a really specific language if you'd like to consider that.
Okay, go ahead, city attorney.
Thank you. And this goes back to the concern raised by Councilmember Bushy, and the distinction between these two things is very reminiscent for me of some conversations that we have around the dinner table, the difference between partially agreeing and partially disagreeing. It might not seem like much of a difference, but here the grand jury only gives us the opportunity to partially disagree. So what I would suggest, if the council shares Councilmember Bushy's concern that we amend the proposed response on findings 2 and 3 to say that we partially disagree with those findings. And then our explanation would be that the city agrees in principle with the finding, but lacks the technical knowledge necessary to agree or disagree, or you could say to confirm the validity of the underlying data on which the finding is based. So actually like better the one I just came up with, to confirm the underlying data. We really don't have the technical expertise to do that. And I think that's the concern that Councilmember Bushy was framing. So would you like me to read that again with my last language that I did, or does somebody else want to take a shot at it?
We like it when you do it.
Okay, let me give it to you one more time. As to both finding 2 and 3, the city partially disagrees. The city agrees in principle with the finding, but lacks the technical knowledge necessary to confirm the validity of the underlying data on which the finding is based.
Thank you, Councilmember Bushy. Any questions on that? No. Okay.
No, sounds great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, city attorney. Okay, so we're back here. Additional comments, Vice Mayor?
I guess with that recommendation, what would be our next step with that? I mean, is a question going to go back if we're partially disagreeing, sort of, but really agreeing? Is the question, what do we do with that information?
So if I may, I'll just speak, maybe the staff has more. Generally with these grand jury responses, we just need to respond, and we either agree or we disagree, partially disagree, and there's no further action required on our part. Whether the grand jury thinks further studies required or anybody else, that can happen, but there's nothing further that we're required to do in response. That may not be where your question was aimed, Vice Mayor.
I can add a clarification also, just to add to what Rob said. I think typically it's the recommendations and our response to the recommendations that are the most substantial and relevant to, especially if we're talking about a countywide implementation. Are we consistently in agreement with what they're recommending? I think is the most kind of important piece to our response. So if we were changing and partially disagreeing with a recommendation, it might have other implications, but I think based on the fact that it's just one of their findings and we are agreeing to their recommendations at this point, I think it's there won't be a need for more follow-up on that.
Okay. I guess in principle, we do know that the findings and the recommendations, which go hand in hand, there's a lot of validity. Whether all the details are built into the grand jury report we don't know. I mean, you could always build more detail into a grand jury report, but we know globally, we know that there's so much news and documentation and studies and research around the impact of climate change that I think as questioning or wavering around it, could be viewed that we're wavering on some of this. And I don't think we are. At least I think that we are committed based on, we have Corey and we have a climate change action plan. We have committed to the work that needs to be done. I'm fully, in support of the recommendations as well as the findings. Could the grand jury report be more thorough and detailed and noted more? Maybe. But I think at the end of the day, I do feel that being really strong in our commitment and agreeing to the findings as well as the recommendations is important for us to move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Yeah, when I look at the exercise of responding to a grand jury, obviously they're affording us only two options. I think of the word sufficiency when I think about what I would recommend. So in terms of when I look at all the citations for finding 2 and 3, I find them technically sufficient. So I would prefer to move forward with agreeing with the findings as written. I think we can maybe give them feedback to say, maybe as an aside, that they could do a little more to provide enhanced technical support for their findings in the future. But I think it's sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bushy. I don't know if what your colleagues have said is changed kind of the approach at all that you were interested in.
I understand that it is not shared by my colleagues, and so my standards for sufficiency are different, and I understand that it is that my position is a minority position, and so I will allow my colleagues to move forward with their motion.
Thank you, and I'll just add the grand jury reports. I think that's such an interesting term, being sufficient. Because as we have these conversations with our community, it's both having the actual data, and you're right, we can read the newspaper and we know that, but I think there's a level of higher standards that we're kind of asking for this report to be, and the assumptions not to be made here. I mean, this is what's being asked, and I agree, this is being explored. We're going to be exploring it here in San Rafael, and not having that additional, how do I say it, sophistication or in terms of technical data, it makes it a little bit harder for us. And I felt if that had been there, that would make this a little easier. I do agree with my colleagues leaving it as the staff recommended. I appreciate Councilwoman Bushy's conversation because I think it really brought forward an important point that as we start to have these conversations, we absolutely need to have the commensurate reports that we are referring to. Some people need that kind of information. We need that as a city. We need to vet it. And we have fantastic staff, Corey and John, unbelievable, you and the folks that you work with. And we don't have big technical teams behind you. So I think that was really what my takeaway is. Councilmember Bushy, which is why I would side with what the staff is doing, because I think your point is really well made. And if there's a way that we can even just say agree, not but, and then period, additional study, because I think the message is a really important one. If we're asking it and we're the first city to go forward, you can bet that it's going to be brought forward in other jurisdictions. So they should have that feedback as well. So with that, I will call for a motion on this item.
I'll go ahead and make the motion to adopt resolution approving the authorizing the mayor to execute the City of San Rafael's response to the 2021-2022 Marin County Civil Grand Jury Report entitled Electrifying Marin's Buildings, a County-Wide Approach Inventory.
Second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
No.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye. That motion carries 3-0.
3-1.
Thank you. 3-1. Oh my God. It's the first time I've got to say that. I messed up. Rerun the tape. That motion, 3-1. Thank you, Dawn, for calling in, as well as the city attorney. Thank you so much. Our last item this evening is hearing on resolution of necessity initiating eminent domain process to acquire portion of 740 Francisco Boulevard West in connection with phase 1 of the Francisco Boulevard West multi-use pathway project. And I see Assistant City Attorney Genevieve Coyle has joined us. Nice to see you. And when you do start talking, we'll have you turn on your mic.
Technical assistance here.
No, you got it.
Yeah. Okay.
No, you got it. Maybe you want to hit slideshow.
I need to hit the slideshow. Perfect. Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm here to present the hearing on the resolution of necessity to acquire property through eminent domain proceedings. And the property to be acquired is a portion of 700 and 740 Francisco Boulevard West. So just a short agenda. As I mentioned, we're here on the hearing on the resolution of necessity. This will provide the property owner to address the council, and then we'll be requesting that you adopt the resolution. The resolution of necessity does need to be passed with a 4/5 vote, so it will need to be all 4 of you voting in favor for it to move forward. So the public project that is necessitating the resolution is the construction of the Smart Larkspur Extension multi-use pathway. This project was constructed in 2 phases. Phase 1 was completed in 2018, and this was a Class 1 bicycle and pedestrian multi-use pathway that extends along the SMART railway tracks from Anderson Drive to Rice Drive. And then phase 2 of the project completed that extension with a Class 4 bicycle facility, and that went from Rice Drive to 2nd Street, completed in 2021. So the entire segment allows bicycles and pedestrians along the pathway from downtown to meet up with the Larkspur bike extension at Anderson Drive. Here's just a depiction of phase 1 of the project. This is the Rice Drive to the Anderson Drive portion, and you can see the multi-use pathway in yellow there, and then you can see how it runs along the SMART railway alignment. The property at issue is on the right side of this screen where the arrow is pointing to Anderson Drive rail crossing, and I have a closer up depiction to show you more specifically. So the property at issue tonight is an 18,398 square foot portion of 740 Francisco Boulevard West. The owner is Francisco Boulevard Investors, LLP. This is a photo of the front of the properties. You can see that they are developed with auto dealerships. The portion of the property at issue, or is the subject property for acquiring, is actually on the back side of those facilities. I know this is not a great depiction of it, but it is roughly outlined there in the red lined, and you can see that that's where the multi-use pathway and ancillary features of that are constructed. So here's a photo of the property. This was taken this morning, so we can all admire the unusual August 1st skies in the background. But this is just a photo of what the property looks like today. So the resolution, you will need to have 5 findings in the resolution. The first 2 are the public interest and necessity require the project. And the second one is the interests sought to be acquired are necessary for the project. In this case, this is a public pathway used for bicycle and pedestrians. It provides a safe and accessible route from downtown to the Larkspur extension pathway. And it runs along the smart railway tracks. And it does accommodate bicycles and pedestrians to directly access the smart railway and the downtown transit centers. The third finding is that the project is located in such a manner as to offer the greatest public benefit with the least private detriment. In this case, the portion of the property was undeveloped. It was not used for any auto dealership operations. In fact, it was on the other side of the back fence to those facilities. So you would determine that the acquiring the property would have the least private detriment. We did extend a government code offer to the property owner, and we did that on July 6th. And the city did, for number 5, the city filed a mitigated negative declaration under CEQA, and that was on December 4th, 2017. So with you, if you adopt the resolution tonight, you will be authorizing the city attorney to commence an action and acquire the property by eminent domain proceedings. We will deposit probable compensation with the state treasury. The amount of that deposit is $368,000. That number is from an independent appraisal that we acquired in June of 2022. And we would apply for a court order to take immediate possession of the property. I do want to point out that what is not subject of the hearing tonight is compensation. So the amount of compensation to acquire the property will be determined by continuing negotiations with the property owner or by a court order. And that's the end of my presentation and available for questions.
Thank you so much. We will start with questions. And then the property owner, after our questions, then comes up and speaks.
If the property owner is here or online, yes.
And is that prior to our questions or after?
That is a good question. Rob, do you know the answer to that? I'm not sure the property owner.
Here he comes.
Yep. Is here.
So we could do it either way, but typically here, if the council has questions for staff following the staff report, the council can inquire of staff, or if there are no questions at this time and the council would like to invite the property owner to approach the podium and speak, that would be fine as well.
Okay, well, we'll start with questions first, and then we will invite the property owner. So,
No questions.
Councilmember Hill?
No questions.
No questions.
I don't have any questions either. So if the property owner or representative would like to approach, and if they're here?
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're here, so.
Okay. I thought that was one of your second things, was that they had the opportunity to speak.
Well, yeah, that's the underlying reason for holding the hearing tonight.
I just want to make sure they have their space.
That's the legal reason. Yes.
And they haven't called in virtually. Can we?
I was just going to say, if you are on Zoom or you're calling in, please press *9 now, or you use the raise hand feature. I see no one raising their hand. Not everyone labels their names as their names.
Okay. Well, we will open up now the public comment and see if there's anyone in the chambers who would like to address the council on this item. Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone virtually who'd like to give public comment on this item?
I see no hands raised right now. Just a reminder, you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom or press *9. And I'll give you a few seconds. I see no public comment.
Thank you. I will close the public comment and turn to my colleagues for either comments and or a motion. Vice Mayor?
No. No other questions? I'm happy to make a motion if there's
Additional comments?
I have no additional comments.
Councilmember Bushy?
Neither do I.
Okay, go ahead. You want to read that?
Alrighty. Make a motion to adopt resolution to determine the necessity to acquire a portion of property of eminent domain in connection with Phase 1 of the Francisco Boulevard West Multi-Use Pathway Project, to authorize commencement of litigation to acquire property by eminent domain, and to seek an order of possession Code of Civil Procedure Section 1245.220.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kurtz.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 4-0.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. We don't have any San Rafael successor agency items, so we are adjourned until September.
Good night, everybody.